কোথায় ইউটিউবে? আরে আগে আমারটা দেখ একবার। আর তোকে তো ওই জন্যই তো বলছি, দাঁড়া করছি আমি। দেখতে পাচ্ছিস? এই দেখ। এই টার্মিনালে কিছু একটা আমাকে কোড বল।
কোড ওরকম লেখে না ওখানে।
তাহলে
কোড ফাইলে লিখতে হয়, তো ফাইলটা তো চালাবি তুই।
ওই সেল ডট এসএইচ দিয়ে সেভ করবো?
হ্যাঁ, যেরকম করে সেমই।
ওই দাঁড়া, তাহলে এই কোথায় করবো? ডেস্কটপে করছি।
হ্যাঁ, সেলেনিয়াম শিখছিস আবার?
না না,
তাহলে
নিউ ফোল্ডার এর মধ্যে।
তোর হোয়াটসঅ্যাপটা খোল আগে, দেখ।
তা কি পাঠিয়েছিস?
দেখ না।
দাঁড়া দাঁড়া, 1 মিনিট দাঁড়া। আরে রিনেম কোথায় গেল? হ্যাঁ, কি লিখবো?
আরে ফোল্ডারটা একবার সিলেক্ট করে এন্টার মারলেই রিনেমে চলে যায়। এন্টার মার,
সিলেক্ট করে
এন্টার মার, এন্টার মার।
হ্যাঁ
ওই
হ্যাঁ,
দেখ।
হয়েছে হয়েছে হয়েছে। সেকালিনার ম্যাক ইউজার। কি লিখবো? অশেষ ডট এসএইচ।
আরে ফোল্ডারে আবার এসএইচ দিলে কি হবে? ফাইল বানাবি তো একটা। ডোন্ট অ্যাড, ডোন্ট অ্যাড।
এবার এইখানে কি করব?
টার্মিনাল খোল।
Where is my terminal?
তো ডেস্কটপে কিছু নেই কেন?
হ্যাঁ, এখানে এবার ওই ফাইলটাতে কি করে রিড করবে এখান থেকে?
সিডি করে যা, সিডি। ডেস্কটপ লেখ বড় হাতের ডি দিয়ে।
সিডি ডেস্কটপ।
ট্যাব মার, ট্যাব ট্যাব মার। এন্টার মার। হ্যাঁ, ওই তো আমার ফোল্ডারটা দেখতে পেয়েছিস?
অশেষ।
হ্যাঁ, এবার আবার সিডি কর, সিডি করে অশেষ লেখ। এ লেখ, ট্যাব মারলে নিয়ে নেবে।
আচ্ছা, ট্যাব মারবো।
হ্যাঁ, এন্টার মার, তারপর হ্যাঁ, অশেষ ফোল্ডারে চলে এসেছিস। এবারে লেখ, লেখ টাচ, স্পেস দিয়ে লেখ কেন একটা এএসএস ডট এসএইচ লেখ। অ্যাসাইনমেন্ট শেল। বড় যত বড় লিখবি তত অসুবিধা লিখতে, এএসএস লিখে দে না। হ্যাঁ, এই তো একটা ফাইল তৈরি হয়ে গেল, এন্টার মার। এবার এলএস লেখ, দেখ দেখবি ফাইলটা দেখাবে। হয় না, দেখেছিস?
হ্যাঁ।
তো
হুম
এবার
হুম
লেখ
হুম।
জি এডিট, যেরকম স্কুলে কলেজে করিস।
ও, জি এডিট কি ছিল জানো বেশ?
দুখানা ডি
ফাইল
হয়ে গেছে। দিয়ে এন্টার এ মার, ট্যাব মার, বাকিটা নিয়ে নেবে।
ও।
না না, জি এডিট, হ্যাঁ এই তো নিয়ে নিয়েছে, এন্টার কর। আচ্ছা, জি এডিট ওটা লিনাক্স এর কমান্ড না। ওটা ওপেন কর,
হ্যাঁ,
জাস্ট লেখ ওপেন, ওপেন ডট এএসএইচ। হ্যাঁ, ট্যাব মেরে দে, বাকি নিয়ে নেবে। হ্যাঁ দেখো, এটা খুলে গেল, দেখলি? এখানে লিখ এবার
এখানে।
কিছু ফাইল ফাইল লিখ। এই মানে কিছু
ও।
কিছু কোড লিখ, বুঝিয়ে যাবে।
ও, তুই রাজনীতি করবি, বুঝলি? বুঝলি? রান করাবো?
রান করি, এ আর বি এর তো প্রিন্ট করালি না, ভ্যালু প্রিন্ট করা। একো করে ডলার সাইন এ,
কি করে?
ডলার সাইন বি।
একো ডলার এ।
ডলার এ স্পেস দে, ডলার বি। ব্যাস, সেভ করেছিস?
করে
ব্যাস,
দিচ্ছি কি ছিল এখানে?
টার্মিনালে চলে
কমান্ড।
যা। লেখ, কি লিখতে হয় জানো? হ্যাঁ, সিএইচ মড প্লাস এক্স।
কি ছিল বলতো?
সিএইচ মড।
ch
আরে
mod।
দুটো আলাদা নয় রে, একসাথেই।
ও আচ্ছা, কোমড প্লাস।
আর ওটা আলাদা, প্লাস এক্স আলাদা। আবার স্পেস দে, লেখে এস, ওই আমার ফাইলের নাম, হ্যাঁ এন্টার। এবার লেখ এসএইচ, তারপর ফাইলের নেম।
এখানে ডট sh কি জানো ছিল, ওটা করতে হয় না না?
আরে এমনি ট্যাব মার না, নিয়ে নেবে।
না না, আমি ওটার কথা বলছি
এন্টার
না।
মার, আর এন্টার নাম্বার। বুঝেছিস, 12 23 112।
হ্যাঁ। ও
হ্যাঁ, হয়ে গেল।
বুঝতে পেরেছি। এখানে প্রোগ্রামিং লিখবো আর এখানে হোয়াটসঅ্যাপ খুলেছি।
লিঙ্ক পাঠিয়েছি দেখ।
ও ভাই, এখানে প্রোগ্রামিং লিখবো আর এখানে তুই তো পুরো ক্যামেরা ক্যামেরা খুলে বসে পড়েছিস করার জন্য।
তুই যতবার কথা বলবি দেখ ওই বারটা কাঁপবে, সিনথেসাইজার
হ্যাঁ,
সিনথেসাইজ সব দিয়ে দিবি। লিঙ্ক পাঠিয়েছি।
হ্যালো, ওই দেখো
আমার
দেখো।
চ্যানেল।
ও ভাই, ওই তো। এখানে প্রোগ্রামিং লিখবো আর এখানে তুই তো পুরো ক্যামেরা ক্যামেরা খুলে বসে পড়েছিস করার জন্য। কতক্ষণের
তুই
ইয়ার
যতবার
ডিলে
কথা
হবে।
বলবি দেখ ওই বারটা কাঁপবে। আরে বন্ধ কর না স্ট্রিমটা।
দাঁড়া, আমি মিউট করে দিচ্ছি ডিসকর্ড এডিএতে এটা। তুই আমাকে পাঠাসিনি বল অশেষ।
আমি 5 দিন হচ্ছে সবে করেছি, আমি কাউকেই পাঠাইনি সাবস্ক্রাইবার, দেখ না। আমি নিজেই করি ওটা, নিজের সাথে। তুই খুলে দেখ, এটার ভেতরে যা, ওই চ্যানেলের ভেতরে গিয়ে দেখ, লাইভের সেকশনে যা, দেখ 5টা 6টা ভিডিও আছে।
2 ঘন্টা 2 ঘন্টা 1 ঘন্টা 3 ঘন্টা 1 ঘন্টা 1 ঘন্টা।
তা এক এক দিনের দেখছিস, ওইটা দেখ 2.5 ঘন্টা, যেটা এটা এখন লাইভ চলছে।
ও
এটা এখন কাজ করবো, আর বসবো এখন 2-3 ঘন্টা বসবো আবার। স্ট্রিমে দেখ, সাইডে দেখবি, স্ট্রিমে দেখাবে দেখ। ওই দেখ। না ওইটা না দাঁড়া, স্ট্রিম ওই দেখ, এবারে দেখাবে। আমি কমেন্ট সেকশনও সব করে রেখেছি।
ডিসেবল।
না ডিজেবল নয়, দেখ স্ট্রিমের মধ্যেই দেখ কমেন্ট সেকশন দেখাবে। ওই দেখ।
ও হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, আচ্ছা আচ্ছা, তুই এটা চালু করে রেখেছিস। তাহলে পুরো অফিসিয়ালদের মতো লাগছে তো।
ভালো লাগছে না রে?
হ্যাঁ,
হ্যাঁ, কাজ করবো এবার দেখ, দেখতে হবে।
এর তো কাজটা কর দেখি। ওই আমাকে একটা কথা বল, ওই সেল প্রোগ্রামিং এ কি এক্সপ্রেশন দিয়ে করতে হবে বাধ্যতামূলক?
এক্সপ্রেশন মানে বলেছে তো করতে, কিন্তু না করলে আর কি করবি।
ওই ইএক্সপি আর এক্সপ্রেশন
হ্যাঁ, ওটা
বলছি।
এক্সপ্রেশন ঠিকই বলেছিস।
কি হাসছিস রে তুই বাবা দেখে?
আউট টু অনিমেল হাউস।
ভাই কত পড়েছিস তুই। এই যে চ্যাটটা যেটা লিখেছি, এটা কিছুক্ষণ পরে চলে যাবে যেন, তাহলে থেকে গেলে তো অসুবিধা হবে।
একেই থাকে।
ও
আমার তো অসুবিধা নেই, আমার স্ক্রিনে দেখাচ্ছে না ওটা।
ও হো 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 হো,
এটা জাস্ট
আচ্ছা।
ওভারলে করা আছে।
যা, আচ্ছা। ও নিয়ে চলে যাও, ওখানে আছে।
আমাকে বলছিস কি ওখান থেকে পার কর
ওই আছে, নিয়ে নে।
আরে পরে বলবো
বাড়িতে কেউ নেই?
আপনি ছয় পল্লী ক্লাবের সামনে দাঁড়ালেন। আচ্ছা আচ্ছা আচ্ছা। বাড়িতে ওখানে পার্সেল আছে, নিয়ে নে না রে। ওই মেন দরজাতে আছে, ওই ছয় পল্লী ক্লাবের সামনে। বাবু ছানি তো মুখ করছে।
আপনি উল্টো পাল্টা লোককে ডেলিভার করে দেয়নি তো? প্রসেস
কি বলছিস?
এই পাইথন হয়ে গেছে তোর সব?
পাইথন আমি করি না দূর।
পাইথনে আমি থিওরি বলছি না, ওই প্র্যাকটিক্যালের
কিচ্ছু জানি না, আমি থিওরিও জানি না, তুই কিছুই এক্সপেক্ট করিস না, খুলেও দেখিনি কোনোদিন।
একদম ভালো লাগে না।
ভালো লাগে না, এখন করতে ইচ্ছে নেই পরে। আরে অরিজিতের ছবি দেখ।
কোথায়? ভাই এই আর একটা ছেলে। আরে আন্টি এখন অনেক কথা বলছে।
আন্টি বলছিল অনেকদিন যাওয়া হবে না, এটা আবার আঙ্কেলটা যাওয়া হবে নিয়ে যাচ্ছে।
পাগল
সত্যি দেখতে চেয়েছি।
আবার
হ্যাঁ
হ্যালো
কেন?
দেবাহুতি, দেবাহুতি আমাদের স্ট্রিম দেখছে।
কোথায়?
দেবাহুতি ম্যাডাম আমাদের সিআর।
God, I will be back. হেভি করলি তো। আবার চলে গেল। ঠিক হয়ে গেছে। আমি তো মোটে ফোন করে একটা বলতে আমি গেলে
ভালো হয়। আমি প্রথমে পেয়েছি।
আঙ্কেলের কি লাগবে? কেন কিনবে সে? অত বড় বাড়িতে উঠান আছে সোনির হট আস্তে আস্তে না না তোকে না ওই আমাকে না তুই আমাকে যে বললি না সিডি ডেস্কটপ তারপরে কি লিখতে হবে একবার আমাকে লিখে পাঠাস তো ওগুলো ঠিক আছে তুই আমাকে লিখে পাঠিয়ে দিস 2-4টে তো বেশি তো ছিল না ওই একো রিড ওগুলো বলছি না একো রিড ফিড ওসব বলছি না ওই শুধু টার্মিনোলজি সিডি ডেস্কটপ করে করলাম না ফাইলটাকে অ্যাক্সেস ওইটা বলছি প্রথমে সিডি ডেস্কটপ লিখবো তারপর ভালো
এগিয়ে দিচ্ছে
কি?
এগিয়ে দিচ্ছে সেটা তো কোথায়
প্রত্যেকেও ভালো ছিল হলো জেবিএল এর ছিল
তত ভালো 5,000 টাকা দাম প্রত্যেকেও ভালো আছে 2,000 টাকা দাম
কেন বসে মার্শালের তোমার
মাঠের স্কুলগুলো ভালো না
কি?
পুরো সাড়ে
মুখটা কত ক্লিয়ার হয়ে গেছে ভাই বুঝতে পারছিস না কিছু কি বললি ওই যে প্রথমে সিডি ডেস্কটপ লিখবো তারপরে হ্যাঁ দাঁড়া এতে দেখ হ্যাঁ এডিট করে দেখছি এটা তো মনে হয় আমার স্ট্রিমই না আমি আমার স্ট্রিম কেন দেখি হ্যাঁ 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 ভালো ভাই হ্যাঁ 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 হুম।
ঠিক আছে তাহলে ধর ধর এখন তো আমি রুট ফোল্ডারে আছি, তো
হ্যাঁ
রুটের ভেতরে আর একটা ফোল্ডার আছে আমার ডেস্কটপ বলে, তো আমি সেই ফোল্ডারে মানে ফোল্ডারের ভেতরের ফোল্ডার যেতে চাইলে তখন আমি সিডি দিয়ে সেই স্পেস দিয়ে সেই ফোল্ডারের নাম দেবো ডেস্কটপ, ঠিক আছে, ট্যাব মারলে অটোমেটিক কমপ্লিট হয়ে যায়।
আচ্ছা
তার হলো ডেস্কটপের মধ্যে চলে এলাম, ডেস্কটপের মধ্যে
হ্যাঁ
এবার ধর ডেস্কটপের মধ্যে আবার ফোল্ডার আছে আমার, তখন আমি সিডি করে যখন ট্যাব দেবো তখন আমার সবকটা ফাইল ফোল্ডার একবারে দেখাবে, এগুলো এত ফোল্ডার আছে আমার, ঠিক আছে। তো আমি এত কিছু চাই না, আমার না তোকে দেখাচ্ছি, কন্ট্রোল সি মারলে পাল্টে যাচ্ছে। সিডি করে আবার একটা আমি ধর ফোল্ডার আছে আমার এখানে ধর ডিএসএ অ্যাচিভমেন্ট, ঠিক আছে, বা টেস্টের ফোল্ডারটা যাই, তখন ডেস্কটপের ভেতর টেস্ট ফোল্ডার বড় হাতে টিই যে লিখবো টেস্ট, তার টেস্ট ফোল্ডারে চলে এলাম, ঠিক আছে। এবার টেস্ট থেকে আমি আবার ব্যাকে যেতে চাই, মানে ডেস্কটপে যেতে চাই, ঠিক আছে, তখন আমি লিখবো সিডি ডট ডট ব্যাকে চলে গিয়ে আবার ডেস্কটপে চলে আসবো। এবার ধর আমি ডেস্কটপ ফোল্ডারের মধ্যেই ধর না আমি টেস্ট ফোল্ডারের মধ্যে একটা ফাইল বানাবো, তাহলে আমি সিডি করে আবার টেস্টে যাব। আরে টেস্ট না না নেই তো না ওই টেস্ট ফোল্ডারটা, সিডি ডট ডট সিডি বড় টেস্ট ফোল্ডার এলাম, এখানে ধর একটা ফাইল বানাবো, ফাইলটা বানাবো কিতে টাচ দিয়ে, আবার ক্যাট দেও হয়, ঠিক আছে, ক্যাট দেও হয়, টাচ দেও হয়, ম্যাকে মনে হয় টাচ আর লিনাক্সে মনে হয় ক্যাট,
টাচ দিয়েই তো করলাম।
টাচ আর ধর আমি লিখলাম হচ্ছে এ ডট টিএক্সটি, টিএক্সটি মানে টেক্সট ফাইল একখানা, ঠিক আছে, দেখো আছে কিন্তু ওর মধ্যে দেখ এলএস করে যখন আমি দেখবো, এলএস করে যখন এন্টার মারবো এ ডট টিএক্সটি ইন্ডেক্স ডট এইচটিএমএল দুখানা ফাইল আছে, আমি ধর এ ডট টিএক্সটিটা ওপেন করতে চাই, তখন আমি করবো ওপেন এ ডট টিএক্সটি, দেখ একটা টেক্সট ফোল্ডারটা এই খুলে গেল আমার এতে, এখানে যা লেখা লিখবো আমি লিখে আমি সেভ করে ক্লোজ করে দিলাম, তো ব্যাস হয়ে গেল কাজ আমার। ওটা আমি যদি ধর এটা যদি সেল প্রোগ্রামিং এ হতো তখন তো যেরকম করে দেখালাম ওই এক্সিকিউটার, তো এই কমান্ড গুলো অনেক কমান্ড আছে, তুই এতে খুললে পেয়ে যাবি, দেখাচ্ছি বেসিক লিনাক্স কমান্ড, এলএস করলে হচ্ছে তোর লিস্ট, পিডব্লিউডি মানে প্রেজেন্ট ওয়ার্কিং ডিরেক্টরি, সিডি করে যাওয়া, এমকেডিআইআর মানে নতুন ফোল্ডার তৈরি করা, এমবি মানে মুভ করা, এগুলো সব করতে করতে মানে শিখে যাবি, বুঝলি? বুঝে গেছি
হ্যাঁ না আমার তো ভালো লাগে না, ওর ভালোর সাথে আমি কি করবো? এই অশেষ আমি 5 মিনিট পরে আসছি। হ্যাঁ
আরে বাবা ঠিক আছে,
আমি ভিজিতে আছি, নিচে ডাকছে মা।
ঠিক আছে অসুবিধা
Well, this is unexpected. Cursor just bought the fastest AI model, and I have a lot to say about it. I also interviewed the team, so make sure you stick around for that. If you watch tech videos on YouTube, you've probably already heard about Cursor, the AI code editor that's based on VS Code. If you've kept up with my crazy history with these Copilot alternatives, you've probably also heard about SuperMaven, a blazingly fast VS Code and NeoVim extension that literally makes recommendations on every single keystroke. I loved SuperMaven as soon as I first tried it, and I was never a huge fan of Copilot. That said, I like SuperMaven so much that I ended up investing in them. Eventually, though, the UX wins in Cursor were too much to ignore. After watching WebDev Cody posting about how we used it for refactors, I knew I had to bite. Again, I got hooked. And again, I reached out to invest. Since I'm an investor, I got the scoop on this merge a little bit early. And since I'm a YouTuber, they were down to let me break the news. They even let me interview them. I wouldn't have invested if I didn't genuinely like the teams and what they're building. But I do have financial ties, so I am inherently biased. So yeah, account for that. If you want to see my whole interview with the team, it'll be linked in the description. It's going on the Throwaways channel because it's long. But I will be taking the official announcement as well as clips from that interview and using those to try and explain what's going on and why it's important. So without further ado, let's look at the announcement. SuperMaven joins Cursor. The two team up to build the next phase of AI coding. Bold statements, but these are bold companies, and I can't imagine many others are positioned properly to make this happen. I'm excited to announce that SuperMaven is joining Cursor. They immediately open by talking about Jacob Jackson's history. It's nuts. This is a very short summary. Let's hear it from him real quick.
I'm Jacob. Until recently, I ran SuperMaven, and now I am excited to run SuperMaven as part of Cursor. I started Tab9 back in 2018 and launched in 2019 Tab9's deep learning version, which I believe was the first application of a large transformer language model to write code. And since then, the space has expanded by a huge amount. When I first started it, people were pretty skeptical that it would even be useful to use these models to write code. And since then, it's taken off. Many millions of people are using these tools every day, and the space has become much more competitive, and the utility to people has become much greater. And we're seeing larger and larger spend by enterprises on these tools because they see the value they can bring. And I think that's only going to continue.
He ended up going to OpenAI to make more stuff happen there. Then he quit, started making what I would consider one of the most effective AI models for doing code stuff. But why are they joining together? Well, in their own words, we have a lot to do, and it seems like we can build a more useful product faster together. Each of us believe that AI makes possible a much better way to build software, that purpose-built models, a tailored editing experience, and lots of clever ideas are necessary to get there. In case you haven't been keeping up with the history, SuperMaven raised a bunch of money and announced they were about to do a full editor themselves, no longer just being a VS Code and NeoVim extension. I'll let them explain real quick why they went in that direction.
Yeah, I think, as a researcher, it's tempting to think that you can just focus on the models and, leave the UX till later. The fact is that model development and the user experience and interface to use that model have to be tightly connected, which is something, Cursor has always understood. And I think you can start from a place of making a really smart model, but eventually you realize that in order to get the full benefits of the smartest possible model, you need to own the user interface, which means you need to have an editor.
Yeah. We really think about, as coding changes, like getting to a place where you kind of invent a new style of programming, make programming much more productive with AI, as like this whole widget problem. And we think that there are big benefits, and we think actually one of the challenges some other folks are having in the space is they kind of separate out model and product. We think there are big benefits to having a team that's really tightly coupled there.
And if you're curious, yes, this does mean the SuperMaven IDE is formally dead, but it doesn't mean SuperMaven is dead. In fact, we have some exciting news about SuperMaven coming up. Of course, they call out what to expect, which you should have caught on to by now. The goal is to make it so the autocomplete in Cursor is way faster and a good bit better too. I know I've missed the speed of SuperMaven as I've used Cursor more and more. Knowing that speed's going to come to the editor I already prefer is very, very exciting. But if you're already happy with SuperMaven in your editor of choice, don't worry, it's not going anywhere.
We've got over 50,000 people continuing to use SuperMaven. That's not going anywhere. We're going to continue to maintain the service, maintain the quality that everyone has come to expect. And, it's actually still growing. And we're excited for that to continue.
From my perspective, it seems like there's a pretty strong angle here, not just them maintaining SuperMaven for sentiment, but using it as a lever to get people to try these tools more meaningfully. I know a lot of people aren't interested in leaving behind their existing VS Code and certainly not leaving behind their NeoVim configs. So they're not going to try Cursor without a lot of push. But if they can try an extension like SuperMaven, get hooked on what it offers, and see that Cursor can go further with it, that makes more sense. And there's even a future I could imagine where SuperMaven kind of becomes Cursor Lite for every editor. Because Cursor, the company and the team there, they just want to make Cursor as great as possible. They're not focused on other editors. SuperMaven historically has been far too deep in these other editors, and makes a lot of sense for them to maintain that while also helping the main Cursor company and the main Cursor IDE make the best possible model for what they're doing as well. That's all I got on this one. I'm genuinely really hyped to see what ends up happening with Cursor here, and I missed SuperMaven. It's really good to be able to talk about it again and explain to y'all what the future looks like. So let me know what you think. Are you excited, scared, or something else? And until next time, peace, nerds.
To Linux that some people are considering even more controversial. There are big changes coming to Linux that some people are considering even more controversial than allowing parts of the kernel to be written in Rust. On October 18th, a kernel developer published a message to the Linux kernel mailing list that showed several other kernel developers had been removed from the maintainers file. The commit message in this patch reads, "Removed some entries due to various compliance requirements. They can come back in the future if sufficient documentation is provided." Now, if we take a look at the changes that were made to this maintainers file, the names of the people removed are Russian sounding, or at least Eastern European. But the real smoking gun here are Russian sounding, or at least Eastern European. Of the people removed are Russian sounding, or at least Eastern European. But the real smoking gun here are the email addresses with the .rutld. Okay, if your name is Dmitry Kozlov and you use mail.ru, you might be a Russian. Now, of course, this vague of an explanation for removing people from the Linux project was not well received. All of the immediate responses right after wanted a better explanation at the very least. And a few days later, one came, replying to a lot of those requests for more details, and the answer essentially was, if the company that you work with is on the US sanctions list, or if it's owned by a company or entity that's on that list, then you cannot be in the maintainers file. And Linux maintainers will be restricted in their ability to collaborate with you. The de-Russification of Linux was also confirmed by Linus himself in the blunt manner that he is so famous for. His response reads, "Okay, lots of Russian trolls out and about. It's entirely clear why the change was done. It's not getting reverted, and using multiple random anonymous accounts to try and grassroot it by Russian troll factories isn't going to change anything." And FYI, for the actual innocent bystanders who aren't troll farm accounts, the various compliance requirements are not just a US thing. If you haven't heard of Russian sanctions yet, you should try and read the news someday. And by news, I don't mean Russian state-sponsored spam. As to sending me a revert patch, please use whatever mush you call brains. I'm Finnish. Did you think I would be supporting Russian aggression? Apparently, it's not just lack of real news, it's lack of history knowledge too. And then there's some more back and forth, people calling Linus a Nazi, reminding him that Finland sided with Germany in World War II, etc. This isn't the first time, in even recent memory, that Russian software has had restrictions put on it. Kaspersky suffered a huge blow to their market share starting in 2017 when it was banned from use on government computers. I was actually working part-time at Best Buy when this happened, and Best Buy themselves decided to pull Kaspersky from their shelves. And they even gave customers that had bought Kaspersky in the past through Best Buy the option to convert their paid licenses. I think it was 1, 2, or 3 years that came with Geek Squad tech support, something like that. They could convert those antivirus licenses over to Webroot or Trend Micro. And then the sale of Kaspersky was banned flat out in the United States, and now you can't even download the free versions of their software in the United States without Tor or a VPN or some other way to get a Russian-friendly IP address. Now, since Kaspersky is a closed source program, which by its nature as an antivirus solution actually needs to run with very high permission levels on your OS, and it scans files on your system and it sends information about those files back to Kaspersky Labs so that they can update their virus definitions. With all of that in mind, it's really easy to see how that kind of software could potentially be weaponized against Russia's enemies. The big red flag there being that it's proprietary software. But I also don't think weaponizing Linux is that far-fetched either. You'd think it would be harder because, again, Linux is open source, and it probably still is harder to weaponize it, but as we've seen with the XZ backdoor, it is still possible for state-backed threat actors to insert malicious code into open source software and have it hiding in plain sight for a long time and nobody notices it. But on the flip side, there's also a risk of government control or intervention into these projects being used as another way to infiltrate them. I mean, in a way, that's exactly what's happening here. Because of sanctions coming from the United States and other countries, Russians are being removed from the project. It doesn't seem that far-fetched that code or maintainers could be added in for purposes of national security. And who's to say that those people who do end up having control over the project don't end up being Russian spies themselves? A similar issue could pop up with the RISC-V project as well. This is an open software instruction standard for CPUs that, in principle, should be accessible to anyone, but the US government is trying to limit access to the Chinese government. Lawmakers have been calling RISC-V a US tool and trying to claim that China's use of RISC-V is therefore illegal. Time and time again, we've seen software companies, usually those that develop privacy-centric software, kind of like what happened with Telegram, bend the knee to whatever government they're under the jurisdiction of when enough legal pressure is applied to them. And because this is a legal compliance issue, there's no way that anyone at the Linux Foundation is going to face a fine or jail time in order to keep Russian maintainers on board. It makes me sad to see this happening and to see something as pure as free software, and especially the kernel, which I think is one of the greatest expressions of free software, be subject to sanctions, and for software to be treated the same as bombs and other kinds of munitions. And the idea of code being classified as munitions is also much older than the current conflict in Ukraine. Some of you might remember the days when browsers and other pieces of software were only allowed to ship with 256-bit SSL domestically in the United States, and then there were international versions of browsers and even programming languages. Like I think there were 2 different versions of Java back in the day that would have usually the same algorithms, but they would be used with much weaker keys like 70-bit instead of 256-bit. I really hope this Russian-Ukraine conflict and the banning of people from the maintainers file doesn't have permanent negative consequences to international software collaboration in the future. These people that were banned are obviously quite talented. I don't think they would have become maintainers in the first place if they were not. And I could see an event like this pushing developers who maybe aren't actually involved with the Russian war machine or really are not, pro-Russia in this conflict, being pushed further towards that side. Maybe they'll focus their efforts into developing Astra Linux or one of the other Russian Linux distros. That's actually one of the apolitical silver linings that I think I see to all of this. The fact that Russia and other nations don't trust proprietary operating systems with Western ties like Windows, and really they shouldn't, and this distrust pushes them to develop their own operating systems, usually based on Linux, since even sanctions can't keep people from forking free software. And if those state-backed efforts to improve the OS result in improvements that anyone can use in their Linux distro to make it better, then I think that's a win for everyone, regardless of where they're from. Tell me your thoughts in the comments section below. Please like and share this video to hack the algorithm, and buy some merch from my website, base.win, where you can save 10% automatically at checkout by paying in Monero XMR, and have a great rest of your day.
I think when America joined the IMO in the early 70s, I think, then like everything that America, I think when America, I think when
In 1964, Russian astronomer Nikolai Kardashev introduced us to the Kardashev scale, a method of measuring a civilization's level of technological capability. At Type 1, a civilization was defined as able to harness the equivalent of 100% of the energy that reaches its planet's surface from its local star. For Earth, that's about 200,000 terawatts of power. At Type 2, a civilization could harness all of the energy produced by its local star, usually by building a Dyson sphere around it. For our sun, that's about 400 billion petawatts, about 2 billion times more energy than reaches our planet. At Type 3, a civilization could harness all of the energy of every star and every black hole in its local galaxy, about 100 billion times more energy than produced by our sun. It may not surprise you that humanity doesn't perform that well when measured on this scale yet. We command about 0.16% of the energy that reaches the surface of our planet, which is kind of embarrassing. But a recent breakthrough just announced this month might change that. This is the first successful creation of a new class of technology. It looks like a normal silicon cell, but it isn't. It is a step change in how we collect the power of the sun. It makes use of a material, perovskites, whose promise has been talked about for a very long time, much like the inevitable dawn of fusion technology. But unlike fusion, this actually now works. And as of last month, you can actually buy one, at least if you're an energy company. To find out more about this technology and why it may be unlocking the next generation of cheap, clean energy, I went to visit a team of scientists in Oxford, in my most flattering outfit yet, to meet Dr. Chris Case and his team, who are the current pioneers and leaders in the field.
We're making more efficient solar cells than silicon, and more efficient solar cells than silicon could ever be turned into.
But how does this technology actually work, and why did Oxford PV win in a sea of other teams trying to advance this technology? To understand that, and why the future is not silicon, we first need to understand how we got here. But first, I have to thank today's sponsor who makes these deeper dive videos possible, Opera. When I'm researching new breakthroughs, I've got a pretty specific routine. I need all of my ideas and research tools easy to access, and that's why recently I've switched over to Opera's desktop browser. My favorite feature is the sidebar, which allows me to access everything quickly and is especially useful for keeping on track of my social media accounts, or to listen to music while I work. I also really like that when searching the web, Opera has a free ad blocker and VPN built in with no third-party extensions required. Opera also has brought in Aria, an AI feature that I use to speed up my workflow. When I'm reading an academic paper, I'll come across a term that I need more background information on, and if I want to know more about it, I highlight the term and hit explore, and Aria will automatically explain it to me. If you then have further questions, you can hit Control and / and Aria will pop up to answer your questions. Aria can also create an image that you want from scratch, interpret images that you upload, and even translate text to speech if you prefer listening rather than reading. If you guys are interested in a more fluid internet experience, check out today's sponsor, Opera. You can use the link in the description down below or the pinned comment for more info. Now, back to the video. In 1839, French physicist Edmond Becquerel observed that when he placed two electrodes in a conductive solution and exposed that solution to light, it produced a small electric voltage, too weak to actually do anything useful with, but marking the discovery of a phenomenon called the photovoltaic effect, turning light into electricity. This breakthrough intrigued the scientific community, but it wasn't until 1883 that Charles Fritz found that by taking a sample of selenium, a material also found to present the photovoltaic effect, and applying an extremely thin layer of gold to it, he could increase its efficiency to a mind-blowing 1%. This was the world's first solar cell ever produced, even if it was kind of bad. In 1887 though, Heinrich Hertz, a physicist famous for only doing one task each second, was trying to generate sparks between two metal electrodes. Through as much accident as science, he found that the sparks were easier to produce when his equipment was in the presence of ultraviolet light, as if the light was capable of knocking electrons off of his material. What he found particularly surprising was that for his specific material, only light of UV frequency or higher had any effect. If he used a lower frequency like normal visible light, even if he turned up the brightness all the way, the effect was never observed. This is interesting because in building solar cells, we also see this behavior. Below a certain minimum wavelength, they can't generate electricity. But why not? For that answer, just like most stories in physics, we needed to wait for Einstein's help. He suggested that light isn't a continuous wave, but a collection of quantized particles called photons, with each photon having a characteristic energy level that depends on its frequency. As it requires a certain amount of energy to break the attachment of an electron to its local atom, only photons of a certain frequency or above have enough energy to break the electron free. This phenomenon was later termed the photoelectric effect, and in thanks to Einstein for this breakthrough in understanding, we gave this otherwise quite obscure scientist the only Nobel Prize he ever received. When we talk about this phenomenon in solar cells though, we think of this as an energy band gap, a minimum energy required to free an electron from the outer valence band of an atom to the conduction band, where electrons can move freely and create electrical currents. The lower that band gap energy, that means the larger the selection of frequencies of light are capable of freeing an electron. Now this sounds like a good thing for collecting as much light as possible, but there is a catch. Photovoltaic cells are made by combining layers of electron-rich material, N-type material, with electron-poor materials, P-type materials. When combined, the electrons at the edge of the electron-rich material rush over and combine with the holes of the electron-poor material, and create a neutral depletion region between the two that has a strong electric field across it. When a photon from the sun hits the depleted region, if it has enough energy, it is capable of freeing an electron, creating an electron-hole pair which the electric field pushes to opposite sides of the device. As the electron makes its way through the material, any energy above that required to first free it from the atom is slowly lost to heat. As a result, the voltage between the two sides of these materials when we later connect them with a wire to extract electrical energy is only ever proportional to the energy required to break the electron free of its atom in the first place. So small bandgap materials collect a wide range of frequencies but produce only very weak voltages. Large bandgap materials, by comparison, can only collect a narrow range of high frequencies, but they produce higher voltages. Both approaches waste energy and create inefficiency, which is something we worry about if we want to ever make our way up to that Type 1 civilization. To quantify this trade-off, in 1962, Shockley and Quasar characterized the balance of bandgap energy against how much of the sun's spectrum a material could collect, and came up with this efficiency distribution, suggesting that materials with a bandgap comparable to silicon were the best choice of solar cells. Conveniently, 8 years earlier, on April 25th of 1954, Bell Labs had already started work on silicon solar cells, and produced a good for the time but still kind of embarrassing cell with an efficiency of 6%. On this news, the New York Times proclaimed that silicon solar cells would lead to the capturing of the limitless energy of the sun, but unfortunately, they were kind of wrong. According to Shockley and Quasar's work, the maximum theoretical efficiency of silicon could never exceed 30%, and actually, despite a further 70 years of innovation after Bell Labs' breakthrough, the best commercially available silicon solar panels are actually more like 18 to 20% efficient, and are pretty much stuck at that limit. The interesting question here is, when the laws of physics say no, how do you use engineering to do it anyway?
In the face of overwhelming odds, I'm left with only one option. I'm gonna have to science the shit out of this.
Many teams around the world came up with a similar answer to the problem of silicon. What if, rather than constructing a solar cell out of just silicon, instead you construct it out of many layers of different materials, with each additional layer tuned to absorb a slightly higher energy part of the light spectrum, so each layer maximized the efficiency of the energy captured from each photon.
And in fact, if you take the concept to the extreme, your most efficient version of a solar cell would be an infinite number of semiconductor materials, each one designed to absorb only the narrowest portion of the spectrum and deliver the electronic energy.
This is a great idea in theory, limited by one simple, more practical problem: cost. In practice, producing just a couple of layers called a tandem cell actually already makes a dramatic improvement.
The step change from a single junction to a two-junction or tandem solar cell takes your theoretical efficiency from somewhere between 27 and 29, depending on the exact material, way up into the 43. So a step change in the potential conversion efficiency for your solar cell.
So now humanity had a design, it just needed a material to help make this happen, and we found it in perovskites. Perovskites were first discovered in 1839, the exact same year that Becquerel discovered the photovoltaic effect, a coincidence that I always find kind of suspicious. Perovskite refers to a specific crystal structure rather than a particular elemental composition. All perovskites have a positive center and corners with negative atoms on each face. As a result, a large number of different elements can be combined together in this form, allowing researchers to engineer crystals with a wide variety of physical, optical, or electrical characteristics.
Largest uses of perovskite materials in the world, developed mostly in the 70s, are the high temperature superconductors used to cool magnetic resonance imaging systems. They are the standard material. So perovskites have been used for decades commercially.
They can also in particular be engineered to absorb specific bands of photons very efficiently. So efficiently that for the same absorption capability as silicon, perovskites only need to be 1/200th of the thickness, or about 100 times thinner than a human hair. This means both less material is required, so a lower cost to produce the unit, and that they can be layered without making a bulky device, even to the point where they can be made into these flexible devices like you see here. Though this one that Oxford PV has developed is at an early stage, and very sensibly, I wasn't allowed to touch it. What I found interesting was that when you make traditional silicon cells, it is incredibly energy intensive and complicated as a process. Silicon cells have to be monocrystalline, meaning that a single near perfect crystal crystal structure exists. Otherwise, it significantly reduces the cell's efficiency. You grow a silicon cell from a single seed crystal, and they come out as a giant silvery mass that is then sliced into perfectly flat layers, not a single atom out of place. By comparison, perovskite manufacture is significantly easier. Oxford PV weren't allowed to give specific details as to how they manufacture their devices, but common approaches in the industry are screen printing, spin coating, or sputtering, all infinitely easier and cheaper than silicon. Each sample is then measured under as close to sunlight relevant conditions as possible on equipment like these solar simulators.
This particular setup is a solar simulator designed to reproduce not only the solar spectrum, but the solar intensity of the sun in a contained environment.
Then the team took some time to show me what these materials actually look like under an electron microscope. Totally disorganized and chaotic looking compared to the pristine surface of a silicon wafer, like a sea of tiny boulders. Obviously these materials still require significant tuning to get the best efficiency possible, but the bar on difficulty and cost for producing just a functioning perovskite cell is significantly lower than silicon.
And so the perovskite, it turns out, has very good properties to enable that to happen. So we call it defect tolerant. So if you have inevitable impurities, so material impurities, or crystal imperfections, either within the crystal structure itself, or within the film or the block of material that we're using to do the absorption, you need those defects to not result in efficiency losses going in that chain of events.
However, despite being defect tolerant, perovskites aren't without their problems. What's kept them from the market up until this point has been just how easily these thin films degrade. If exposed to moisture, oxygen, a bad attitude, any negative environment rapidly reduces their efficiency and lifespan, making real-world use basically impossible. This is why they have quite so many high-five machines throughout the lab. All development is done in protective environments free from moisture and oxygen, making developing reliable devices a slow and systematic process. As a result, making a successful device is a significant challenge because the innovation space, the range of possible things that you could assemble and call a perovskite, is huge.
Something like 500,000 possible compositions for perovskite solar cells. You could try out 500,000, but you don't want to.
Oxford PV have tested thousands of different combinations of perovskite, and if you think about it, each additional layer of perovskite you add absorbs a slightly different color, so is made of a slightly different material, which may behave slightly differently depending on the layer above and below it. So suddenly you start to understand how large and complex actually building a working device becomes. Despite the challenge of this field, teams around the world rushed to embrace perovskites and have been working on them for a little over a decade. Many breakthroughs have been announced which are interesting for their technical ingenuity, but at the end of the day you want to make something that actually works. And that's where Oxford PV were the first to say, how do we maximize the capability of a perovskite while minimizing the risk and timeline to get a breakthrough into the hands of the world? And that's the sort of engineering question I always find really compelling.
In order to get that new cell technology out into the market, out into the world and doing good as quickly as possible, you want to piggyback on the capability that's already out there. That gives you the early opportunity to take this perovskite and you apply it as a thin film coating, the second cell, simply on top of what is now a very highly developed, widely available and manufacturable silicon solar cell.
In 2014, Oxford PV were, as far as I can find, the first team in the world to switch to a silicon perovskite tandem cell design, focusing on designing just a single new perovskite material tuned to be effective at absorbing the bluer, higher energy photons, and then relying on a well-understood, highly optimized silicon layer below to absorb the lower, redder photons. Through this approach, over the last few years, they have been able to produce a cell efficiency of about 28% already, basically at the theoretical upper maximum limit that silicon could ever reach by itself. Many other teams around the world were making similar sorts of breakthroughs, but the problem most were encountering was that they could produce these in the lab, but never successfully manufacture them at scale. In 2017, Oxford PV opened the world's first volume manufacturing line for perovskite on silicon tandem solar cells, saying a core part of their innovation strategy needed to be making these things scalable as well as efficient as possible. The unit efficiency, which they now quote, which is differentiated to the cell efficiency, is already at 24%. That is 20% higher than the...
I think when